Very good morning to all our dear listeners. Welcome to Acfim Talks, yet another edition. Today, the 25th of February 2022. And today we discuss Ipod and the rumblings on public funding to political parties. I'll be introducing my panelists in about a minute or two. But before we get started, let me take this opportunity to invite everybody out there to join us and be part of this discussion. We also ask you to subscribe to all our social media platforms, both on Twitter, the Acfim handle, and also on our YouTube channel. You'll be getting the notifications, including our Facebook page, so that you can be part of the discussions. You send in your questions and also your contributions to a very interesting topic today. Let me start this way, that the last 2 weeks, it has been drama within the opposition camp, and the main cast being DPs Norbert Mao and the new big boys, NUP. NUP is a national unity platform. The public grants are mainly stemming from the 23 billion that was shared between NRM, NRM taking 17 billion, NUP taking 1.3 billion, FDC taking 1.7 billion, DP and UP sharing 485 each, and also German and PPP getting 106 billion each. Mao has since called NUP hypocrites, having benefited from the 23 billion, which apparently came out of a negotiated process within Ipod, a space NUP has shunned with some reasons the party advances. Also, the president proposed that only political parties participating in Ipod should benefit from public funding. This and much more forms the basis of our discussion today. And with me, allow me to introduce an all-male panel, and apologies, no pun intended. We will do better next time. But for today, let us have this discussion with only male in the house, starting with, I think I should be having Osinde on set. Osinde, I can't see you, but starting with Frank Russa, who is the current country representative for Netherlands Institute for Party Democracy, and this is the host to the Inter-Party Organization for Dialogue, Ipod, a platform that brings together political parties with representation in parliament. In that, Russa serves as the executive secretary for the Ipod platform. Frank, you're most welcome.
Thank you, and good morning to you and to all who are viewing us and engaged in this discussion this morning.
All right. Next, I want to introduce Osinde. Osinde, yes, I can now see you. Michael Orash Osinde, who is the cabinet member of the Uganda People's Party, the one of the oldest parties in the land. Michael Osinde is also the chairperson for the legal committee of the National Consultative Forum, a constitutional platform that brings together all registered political parties in Uganda. He's a lawyer by training and practice. He's also the chairperson of the Human Rights Bureau at UPC. Michael, it's good to have you again at Acfim Talks.
It's a pleasure being with you, and especially seeing my brother some 2 months.
Okay, Michael, you seem to be having a bit of a in the connection, but I think we'll fix that. Our next panelist, who is no stranger on set, is Henry Muguzi, who is an electoral democracy expert, an anti-corruption activist, and a researcher with a niche on money in politics. He's also the executive director of Alliance for Finance Monitoring, a Pan-African civil society organization that works on monitoring money in politics. Henry, you much very welcome to Acfim Talks.
Yeah, colleagues, our viewers, always a pleasure for me to be here, and good morning from where you're joining us from.
All right. I want to start with Michael here, and I unfortunately is off, but let me wait for Michael to get back on set, because I have a question that I think would be very important Michael attacks it before any other. But as I wait for Michael, let me probably throw this question to Frank. Frank, what is the genesis of public funding of political parties? There's this whole confusion within the public about, we are calling it Ipod money, and then we know there's public party financing, public funding of political parties, and people are confusing those two. Give us a genesis.
Thank you very much to you, Felix. Actually, I'm glad that you've asked that question first. I was hoping that we begin with that question, because if we don't get that clearly, we're going to have problems. So I thank you so much that technology has given me the chance to go first, because I wanted that clear first. So public funding for political parties was not provided for in the Constitution of Uganda. It was only introduced into the laws of Uganda after a discussion was held in an informal platform called Ipod in 2010. Political parties with representation in parliament signed a memorandum of understanding to begin the Interparty Organization for Dialogue sometime in 2010. And among the first key things they discussed was the need to introduce public funding for political parties as it is done in many other jurisdictions. Those conversations culminated into the amendment of the Political Parties and Organizations Act 2010, amending Section 14 thereof to provide for public funding for political parties for the very first time. Since 2011 to date, every year there has been money allocated to political parties with representation in parliament that has been allocated by the Uganda Electoral Commission in accordance with the formula that are set out under Section 14A of the Political Parties and Organizations Act. The law does not specify how much money should go to the parties. The law only talks about how the money that is allocated to political parties should be apportioned among them. And it says that during elections, it should be equal to all political parties with representation in parliament. And outside election time, it should be allocated depending on the numerical strength of each and political party represented in parliament. That has been the position. However, over time, there have been two major disputes or complaints or points of discussion that have arisen in relation to political party funding. One of them has been that the formula that is in the law is not fair, that there is a need to amend the law to adopt a more equitable formula for sharing of public funding to political parties. Some political parties that are not in Ipod or that are not in parliament have also complained and said we should have funding for all political parties. Those in Ipod have complained and said the method of money that is distributed to the political parties in parliament is not fair. It needs to be reviewed. The second issue that has been complained about over the years has been the fact that the available funding for political parties is limited. 10 billion shillings for 5 political parties in the 10th parliament was considered to be low. Even beyond the formula, they were saying this money is low, it needs to be increased. All these discussions about changing the formula of sharing, increasing the funding available, were discussed in the informal umbrella arrangement called Interparty Organization for Dialogue. So in the summit of 2019, it was unanimously agreed that there is a need to increase this funding from 10 billion to 35 billion. It was also agreed that the formula to distribute this money should be amended so that 15% of this money can be shared equally for those who are eligible for administrative costs. Because the reasoning is big and small parties all have admin costs. They have to pay for rent, they have to service their cars, they have to pay salaries, they have to pay statutory obligations, etc., etc. And then they agreed that another 15% should be allocated to the Ipod Secretariat for joint activities to promote the strength of political parties, dialogue, activities, and other things that Ipod does that benefit all members of Ipod. Then the 70% was to be distributed according to numerical strength. That is what was agreed upon in Ipod Summit of 2019. Unfortunately, the agreements of the Ipod Summit were never translated into law. The law was never amended to capture the aspirations of the discussions in the Ipod Summits. However, one of the things that was agreed upon in the Ipod Summits was implemented, namely increasing the money from 10 billion to 35 billion. And when it was released in the last quarter, the supplementary budget indicated that the 35 billion was being released for political parties under the Ipod framework. I think the use of the word Ipod framework in the supplementary budget caused some confusion. The Ministry of Finance released 23 of the 35 to the Electoral Commission. So when the Electoral Commission received this money and saw that it was written on 35 under the Ipod framework, the Electoral Commission does not know Ipod because Ipod is created by a memorandum of understanding. So the Electoral Commission wrote back to the Minister of Finance and the Attorney General to get clarification on how we should proceed with this money. And the advice from the Attorney General was, the law is clear. When that money comes, you have to share it in accordance with the numerical strength to all the political parties with the representation in Parliament, and those are 7 as we speak. So the Electoral Commission went ahead to distribute the money in the way that you earlier on described. However, let me point out 2 more things that are important for this conversation. During the financial year 2020-2021, 15 billion had been released to political parties. And because the law said that in the year of elections, money should be shared equally, the expectation was for that all political parties with representation in Parliament, namely the 5 BP, UPC, NRM, JEMA, and FDC, were expecting to get equal share because it was an election year. The Electoral Commission did not do that. Instead, it went ahead to share the money in accordance with numerical strength. So it caused a lot of anger and disturbance in the political parties, to the extent that in the March 2021 summit, it was raised to the president in his capacity as the chairman of the Ipod summit and chairman of NRM, that the spirit of Ipod was being undermined because what was agreed upon is never implemented, and even what the law provides is ignored. For example, why didn't we share money to political parties equally in the last election? And the president promised that they were going to have a supplementary budget, and when it comes, they'll begin by paying back those areas to the 5 who missed out during elections. So when the 23 was divided according to numerical strength, it again created disharmony because some people expected it to be shared, to have some areas from it to be shared equally to answer the mistake that was done during election time. So that was not done. So we have recently had another meeting. On the 9th of February, there was a meeting between the president and the secretary generals of the political parties. The president in his capacity as the chairman of the Ipod summit and the political parties. And this issue was raised again, saying, Mr. President, money was released in accordance to what we had agreed upon in Ipod, in the supplementary budget. It was given to the Electoral Commission, and the Electoral Commission used a formula that we have always complained about. And number 2, even the areas you had promised to give political parties that were in Parliament at the time of the last election was not realized. Now, because of that discussion, 2 things became clear: that there will be a need to amend the law to provide for that new formula into the law so that it is clear, so the Electoral Commission can know what to do. But number 2, there was a question of now, what do we do for political parties who are not interested in our conversations here that come produce these results, yet seem to be the biggest beneficiaries? Now, in that regard, the president made a proposal that political parties who are not within the discussions should not even benefit from it. But that was his proposal. It has not been yet adopted by everybody else. And in any case, it is the Parliament of Uganda with a mandate to make laws. So when that time comes to amend the law, we shall hear the debate and the Parliament shall take a decision. But let me make two things clear as I conclude. All political party funding, introducing it into the law, increasing the amount available, and the modalities of how it should be distributed have been discussed under the umbrella of Ipod. However, the beneficiaries of this money are dictated by the laws of Uganda, namely the Political Parties and Organizations Act. And as far as that law is concerned, it is all political parties with representation in Parliament. It has nothing to do with whether you're a member of Ipod or not, because Ipod is not mentioned in the law, at least not now. So when you hear President Mao calling this money Ipod money, I think what he means is that this money was agreed upon, increased, and through Ipod frameworks. Because the law does not talk about 35 billion. The law talks about public funding. The 35 billion was a result of discussions in Ipod. But the fact that NUP is benefiting from it is also correct, because the law says all political parties with representation in Parliament. Until that law is amended, NUP is a right beneficiary of this money. It is only unfortunate that for us as facilitators of the dialogue, it would have been better that all these people, instead of quarreling on social media, they came back to the dialogue table and discussed these issues. Because it is better. It is better politics. It's better for our country. It is better for the health of our politics. It is better for all of us if we can have a civilized way of discussing these issues, as opposed to throwing mud at each other in public spaces. So for me, from the side of the Ipod Secretariat, I hope that sheds light on what the question is.
Frank, you have really done justice to bring to light some of the things behind scenes that happen that bring us to the current debate in public. But let me bring in here, Michael, I want to understand, where is NSCF, National Consultative Forum, in all this? Frank has talked about the history, the discussion, and how it did eventually graduate into public funding of political parties. But where is NCF, a body that is constitutionally in place within this whole mix of public funding?
Thank you very much, Ndugu Henry. I hope this time around you are getting me clear. Do you hear me?
I can hear you.
Thank you. I want to first of all thank Ndugu Frank for his humble submissions, and all of you members who are online. Two things. One, whereas I do agree with all that Ndugu Frank has raised, I wanted to point out on the environment much earlier that because of the legal notice number 1, when NRM was here, government envisaged that in order to have multi-party dispensation proceed here, there was need to bring all political parties together, and therefore need to formally have an institution called National Consultative Forum, which under Article 71(2) of the Constitution brings about the component of National Consultative Forum. We went ahead as NCF to ensure that in order to operationalize NCF, there was need to have a few aspects of funding political parties. And in that regard, we specifically pushed government to recognize all registered political parties. And this is why Section 14A of the Political Parties and Organizations Act captures not only funding political parties because of their numerical strength in Parliament, but rather appreciating that all registered political parties in Uganda should be given money even to run administrative costs.
Michael, just a minute. Yes. According to Frank's account, the discussion, because Ipod I think started around 2010, if I get your account right, and the discussions to finance political parties. So when did NCF come into play?
Now, way back before, you will appreciate that NCF was launched in October 2010. And the idea was that government had it in mind that there was need to bring harmony in this country by regulating and having all registered political parties. And Frank will agree with you that way back there was a benchmark in Ghana where we wanted to go and study how that this system worked. That was also due in consultation with NCF. Apparently, I am not disagreeing with Frank. I am saying government had intention to make sure that all registered political parties are brought together in a forum called NCF, and went ahead actually through the Attorney General to make sure that the Political Parties and Organizations Act operationalizes the aspect of funding all registered political parties. And that's why I'm drawing the aspect of Section 14A, Section 14B, and Section 14C, which talks about numerical strength. Apparently, Ipod has done a very good job by trying to reinforce the component of Section 14A and B, which apparently was redundant because government or political parties that have representation in parliament were the only ones benefiting and therefore bringing disharmony within all the registered political parties. And because of that, a summit took place. Ipod did a good job in 2019. You recall vividly in that summit, we had issues to do with the FDC. They thought Ipod was wasting time. We had issues, but because of the good negotiation of Ipod, that meeting took place, courtesy of the diplomacy of Honorable Jima Kena and Mao by then. We had to sit in that summit. In that summit, a milestone was arrived at. For example, agreeing to increase the money from 10 to 35. That was a good milestone. However, do not try to say that before Ipod came, government did not think about funding all political parties. And that's why I've quoted that law. Ipod played a big role of making sure that that law is actually looked into. And Ipod did a good job by networking with government to see that that dialogue takes place. And apparently, we are seeing a situation where other political parties, Ipod has even been agitating for them. The difference is that government had this in mind way back because of the legal notice number 1, which was restricting everybody else to a single multi-party system. And they had to show that there is a law which helps all the registered political parties in Uganda so that we move in harmony. However, as NCF, we have been having a challenge each time other political parties without representation come to parliament, come to NCF, as Frank has indicated. They always say, why are those ones only recognized? And that's what Ipod was trying to chew in that dialogue, that let's work with everybody else on board, even if this law is like this, government has been reluctant in financing other political parties without representation. So that is the crux, that's the area. And Frank made a very important aspect that Electoral Commission in the laws of Uganda does not recognize Ipod for a simple reason that Ipod was created by an MOU, whereas NCF is a constitutional body which has been there. And this money would have even gone to Ipod directly, for example. The question is that it couldn't go directly to Ipod. He had to come to Electoral Commission because it must be regulated here. So that is the crux of the matter. Ndogo Felix.
Thank you so much. Henry, let me bring you in here. And I want you to help me because, and Frank talked about it, the president raises a concern. But we all know sometimes when the president raises a concern, it's quickly followed through that those who do not participate in the Ipod space should from public funding of political parties. And we know very well that NOB has officially come out with this test itself not to be part of the Ipod space. What is your take? What do you read into this?
Thank you very much, Felix. Of course, you ask quite an interesting question. I want to argue that even when Uganda returned to what they called on paper multi-party political dispensation. The country in practice remained under single-party rule, which is why what we are seeing today is something you can call in the discourse of multi-party dispensation, is something you can call a dominant party system. Dominant party system where the party in power dominates political space, dominates electoral space, and seeks to control and domineer over the others. Now, under such a situation, I wouldn't be surprised to argue, to learn that behind the curtains, the thing behind the thing under this funding could be also to help government strengthen its handle on these political parties, make sure they are kept in check, because can you bite the hand that feeds you? But that said, so when the president says, when NUP comes out and says, look, we're not joining Ipod, because then we are going to subject ourselves under your control. But again, goes ahead and takes the money, and the president presupposes otherwise. It speaks about the lack of clarity over this money. I know that in other electoral jurisdictions, when they have a political party law that speaks about, among others, about things to do with the public financing, they have gone ahead and developed regulations. In Uganda, the Political Parties and Organizations Act does not have regulations that that guide on how it should be implemented. And so, for a president that wants that pretends over a party that wants to domineer and dominate political space, you would not be surprised that that is his opinion is with regard to amending the law to make sure that if you're not a part of Ipod, you don't get benefit from this money. But I think also the bigger question for me as a citizen is, we have been financing political parties as taxpayers since financial 2015-2016. My interest is in how is this money regulated, how is it utilized, how is it accounted for? Is it clear? Are there clear accountability guidelines in other countries, in other jurisdictions? If you look at Botswana, look at Lesotho, you look at Tanzania, there are guidelines. For example, you cannot commingle this money with other monies. In Uganda, there's no such a requirement. Okay, all the political parties have to do is to present details of their account and who are the signatories and the electoral commission who shall wire money. We don't know whether this money is audited. And this money, as always, comes in the form of arrears. The financial year started in July 2021. The money is released 7 months into the financial year. Now, of course, you would imagine it's going to finance also activities that have been implemented since July. So we are going to see political parties are in a situation where they are going now to be paying arrears. As in any situation when arrears come into the picture, they are always surrounded by some form of vulnerability to abuse. The political parties, none of the political parties have been checking since morning on their websites. None of them has ever gone ahead to publish how they utilized the funds they received last year. So the lack of accountability and transparency in utilizing this money, and the laxity on the part of the Electoral Commission, on the part of the Auditor General, on the part of the Public Accountability, the Public Accountability Committee of Parliament, to even question how this money is utilized is the major concern for me. But as I conclude on this point, I think it's also improper for a political party called NUP to not register and become and enroll as a member of Ipod, and then go ahead and take this money, because it's at this level that we want them to demonstrate their credentials in terms of political tolerance, in terms of seeing the bigger picture. For me, every time I hear the arguments, I think that the political party NUP is thinking that Uganda starts and ends with the regime of Mr. Museveni. For a party that wants to be seen as the future of this country, considering the number of young people that subscribe to its membership, we want to see them looking at the bigger picture. And you see, sometimes the bigger picture may mean that you can actually sit on the same table with your enemy. You see, because you see they are failing and I don't understand why they are so much obscured by the man called Museveni, because Uganda is bigger than Museveni. Uganda is bigger than the regime. We would want to see dialogue, because none of us would want to go back to the mayhem that the country went back or passed through. Thank you, Felix.
Thank you, Henry. Let's go for a break. But when we come back, we'll continue with the discussion, looking at the modalities in case money was to be channeled through Ipod. What are the legalese around it and the modalities? Let's go for a break, and then when we return, we'll continue the discussion.